welcome. Today, I'm going to talk about the reason that I've been away for 3 years, lol. This thought has sort of come as a result of, I graduated from university, I was studying philosophy, I had all of these thoughts, and I was posting on this channel a lot. And then I kind of stopped. My life eased into this almost natural complacency. I got a 9-to-5 job, I started having like a steady income, I had access to all of these luxuries, I've had access to all of these luxuries, and I found myself sort of lulled into a state of unquestioning, a state of uncuriosity almost, which isn't a word, about the world. And as someone who cares about and used to really ferociously fight for all of these different sort of causes and talk about these kinds of things, I've been really disappointed in myself. Honestly, like I stopped reading theory because I don't know, maybe I was like, let me take a break after uni, but then I just never started again. The news, I saw it as like, I've been seeing it as a very depressing kind of source, which it is, but it also doesn't mean that you should know what's going on in the world. And I've just stopped showing up for the causes that I was so avidly into. I've sat and I've thought about why, and I've examined this within myself, but I've also examined it within our collective consciousness. And I wanted to return to this realm, and talk about it. And I think a lot of this happens, obviously, like I've described, as you grow older, access to power, privilege, etc., causes a lot of forms of radicalism to retreat. Because who doesn't like being comfortable? You know what I mean? I've been really disappointed in myself for almost falling victim to this as well. And I'm glad that I've somewhat, woken back up a little bit. And I think that has a lot to do with the current political climate, like the rapid descent of the world into, honestly, fascism will do that to a person. I can't necessarily sit back and just watch the fire burn and not do what I know I can do and not know what I know that I can know and share it, kind of thing. So that's what I'm going to be back doing. And actually that's what this video is about. I'm going to be talking about this whole kind of decline in critical thinking. No one wants to think anymore. No one can think for themselves. What is causing this, that, the other. So let's get into it. I think in general, globally, there is this sense of fatigue, and it has a lot to do with sort of this age of information wherein we have access to everything always, all the time, and we're constantly bombarded with news and entertainment. It's overstimulating, to say the least, and it has the effect ultimately of sort of leading us to drown out any noise that isn't immediately pleasurable. It means that anything negative or that requires a little bit more thought or is just less stimulating automatically is filtered out because we want the easiest information, the most fun information first, because there's so much of it, right? Unfortunately, the stuff that we tend to ignore tends to be the stuff that we kind of need to know. It's the stuff that informs us as to what's going on in the world, and the stuff that almost challenges the status quo. That's the stuff that we find ourselves ignoring with all of this information. The sheer amount of information that we get, it almost facilitates a sense of unquestioning, because the stuff we choose to consume is simple, it's straightforward, it's entertaining, which means that the stuff that we ignore that would require us to think and evaluate and use our critical thinking faculties, that's not the stuff we're engaging with. And that is the problem here. We're not being instantly gratified by that stuff, so we don't engage with them. But that's exactly what we need to be engaging with. Now, there are still people in the world, including myself, for example, who have chosen to, despite all of this, despite the odds being against us, still engage with this kind of content, with political content. However, I still argue that the sort of algorithmification, whatever, of information and of knowledge means that even those who do choose to engage with critical perspectives, with politics, philosophy, sociology, whatever, anything that sort of requires a more of a morsel of critical thought than most other forms of content consuming do, that still exists within an echo chamber. So in this sense, it's a bit dangerous because one has a view, and because of algorithms, the way they work, every single piece of information that a person is consuming, once they kind of already hold that view, reinforces that view. So you get people who maybe kind of believe in something, and then the algorithm clocks onto it, and they're like, oh, I'm going to show you everyone else who also believes this thing, so this is the only thing you believe. There's only one perspective you're ever getting, and it's the one you already agree with. And you can understand why that's dangerous, right? Because then you don't see any flaws in your perspective. You think this is the ultimate truth, there's nothing else there's nothing that could be wrong about this, which obviously isn't the case. Even if a position you hold is truer than another one, you still need to know the other one in order to justify your stance, right? And I think this is actually exactly how we get the quality of conversation and debate that we do with things like the car and, you know, just like this general inflammatory content, this exaggerated debate. It's never really debate. It's a I'm right, you're wrong, this isn't a conversation kind of thing. It isn't about having productive conversation. It's about saying gotcha. It's about saying you are wrong. And I don't think people realize this. I've said this forever. You need other perspectives to strengthen your own perspective. And I think, yeah, again, the volume of information, the algorithmification of information is eroding our ability to engage with other perspectives, which in turn, despite the fact that we're like maybe this specific group of people might still be consuming content that requires them some thought, it isn't engaging them in a way that is productive for, you know, like actual change, for example. And I think that in these echo chambers, that's why we lose nuance. You know, it's one of the ways in which we lose nuance. Like, it's one thing to, you know, just not engage in any kind of, you know, critical or vaguely intellectual, political, whatever content. But it's another thing to engage with it and only engage with one particular part of it, you know, because then all nuance is lost. There's no details, you know, it is just this is how it is. And that's that. The lack of nuance in both instances is a problem, because nuance is the thing that allows us to see the gray, and without a gray there's only black and there's only white. And then we have a world in which extremism is normalized. We have a world in which it is so easy to become almost complacent and almost agreeable even to the kind of extreme political climates that we see ourselves in currently. I think what we see playing out on our little screens is just like a microcosm of the world at large. So what I'm talking about in terms of, you know, consuming social media content, whether it be political, not, and picking a side, we've developed like a marriage to complete and utter correctness. We're completely right, everyone else is completely wrong, there is no in between. It doesn't matter whether our views sway one way or the other. All that matters, I think, here is that we're committed to one side, incapable of thought outside of that group. And I think the danger of this is that we're being taught not how to think for ourselves, but how to remain agreeable to an opinion held by a group already. There's a lack of questioning. It's like the blindly following. I think that is the danger zone that we're in, because we're creating conditions for a population that doesn't know how to think for themselves. The population that is susceptible to groupthink, a population that is easy to manipulate. Hannah Arendt, who was a philosopher, political theorist, she actually spoke a lot about this. She wrote about totalitarian movements and how they use ideology and this idea like of this is completely right, this is completely wrong, to isolate people. And it is through this isolation, through this removal of one's ability to critically think for themselves, to form opinions that they themselves hold, that extremism thrives. She argued that the way that this happens is through the creation of sort of cynicism and skepticism. You have to make people skeptical of the world around them in order to isolate them, make them easier to pull into things like groupthink, make it so that they can't rely upon their own judgment, which is exactly where we're at. We're a population of people who can't rely on our own judgment because we are being formed by algorithms in a way. I want to talk about how this happens in two ways based on the two kind of groups of people I've just sort of spoken about. So first, yeah, the sheer volume of content that's available on the internet, coupled with how tired everyone is, what I was talking about, how everyone, yeah, it sort of is like in their routines, they just want to be comfortable. It creates a sense of fatigue. So people only want to consume the stuff that is easy, is comfortable. They don't have to question useless content even, you know, think like your shopping hauls, your like get ready with me's, all of that stuff. Entertaining, yes, but ultimately useless content, you know, like it's not really giving value other than pleasure. It's the kind of content that requires no thought. And I like to call this it's like a bit of a pacifier. This kind of content creates a cynicism towards the world and everything going on within it, because the actual events of the world versus, you know, the get ready with me, the hauls, it doesn't produce the same kind of dopamine. Like, consuming that content doesn't give you the same hit as watching these videos. And I think in this instance, the individual loses their ability to think for themselves by way of constant distraction, because they're not engaging those facilities ever because they don't want to. There is no desire to, because it doesn't produce dopamine. And that becomes a tool for extremist movement by way of indifference. It becomes a matter of if one is unwilling, and Arendt talks about this, to come face to face with the world as it is, then you'll be susceptible to ideological thought, because you won't have the faculties to differentiate between what you actually think versus what you are being told to think. And the second way that Arendt's ideas can be used in the second example that I gave is through this idea of polarization that I've discussed. Echo chambers create like a unique sense of isolation, which often results in like an unwillingness or an eventually inability to think outside of the thoughts of a group or of the box that one has been put in. And it is through this group isolation that extremist movements thrive in, because they completely remove an individual's ability to see nuance and form their own opinions outside of those of the group. And honestly, if you think about it, it's a bit of like a frog in boiling water situation. Like, again, like I mentioned with the previous group of people, we enter the workforce, it ties us out, we scroll for hours online, we have an opinion that confirms our opinions, it reinforces itself. And this kind of content keeps us engaged through like a kind of sensationalism, a kind of like, again, like I said, gotcha quality. And it doesn't feed us context or nuance behind ideas or any opposition to strengthen ideas. It just tells us that we're right. It creates a habit of disengaging, again, similar to the first group of people, from things that we don't immediately agree with. And instead of in like a pacifying way, in like a way of gratification, we don't have our views affirmed if they're being challenged. And I think that in a different way wears away our critical thinking skills, because we just don't want to be wrong. Like, no one is open to being wrong. No one is open to hearing anything that might mean that they're wrong. It's this process of slow and measured like isolation that people really like in this specific group think like, okay, yeah, I'm informed, when in fact they are just as bad as the first group of people, in the sense of they remain susceptible to being pulled into something that might not be good for them, might not be good for the world, because they can't see beyond what they're being told. So obviously both of those are very doom and gloom, and both are awful situations. And I think the majority of people, at least in this part of the world, Northern Europe, and I guess the West, I believe fall into at least one of these categories, which I think is really scary. Like, either people don't engage in politics at all, making them susceptible to capture by way of any sort of stronghold ideology, or they do, but they engage in one-sided, unnuanced, almost religious cult-like devotion to certain causes that handicaps them also from nuance. Either way, critical thinking is becoming a scarce resource. It's happening while the world descends into various kinds of extremism and political extremism, with no one having the faculties to challenge it. If anything, becoming a tool for it, much like Arendt spoke about. I don't really know what the way forward here is, but I think one of the ways forward would be to sort of re-engage these faculties, you know, like reclaim our attention spans. We train ourselves to become more comfortable with engaging with alternative forms of media. It comes from looking outside, from forming community, from seeing what is going on with the world, interacting, exploring with perspectives that might be different from our own, seeing beyond the black and white of issues, and really, really leaning into nuance, not retreating into the lives of convenience we've grown accustomed to. This is how we start to think for ourselves and remove the sort of main powers fueling the almost oppressive extremist regimes that we see unfolding throughout the world right now. Ignorance is never the way forward, whether it be willful in the sense of this doesn't make me feel good, I don't want to talk about it, or like almost unintentional, whereby you feel informed, but what are you informed about? Are you challenging your biases, etc.? There is just a lot that we need to look at and sit with, and this is where I'm at, and this is what I'm doing, and that's what I want to keep trying to do now in my return to this channel. I'm not sure how comprehensive that was. I don't know if any of that made any sense, and I'm sorry if it was really jumbled. I'm still kind of getting back into this. I haven't written an essay in a really long time, so I don't know if my ideas made sense, but I hope they did. You were able to take something away from this. I'll be back soon with some more thoughts. I have many, probably on a different issue, but thank you very much for watching if you did make it this far. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.